Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. At dawn, Clint Weston was fixing pipes on his frostbitten ranch. By sunset, he was in handcuffs for tearing down a fake HOA gate on land his family had owned since 1947. What started as a boundary dispute exploded into a full-blown war. One rancher, one fake HOA, and no one saw him coming. It was just after 6 in the morning, and I was knee-deep in frost-covered pasture, elbowing a broken irrigation valve back into place with a wrench older than most subdivisions in this county. My breath steamed in the cold mountain air as the sun tried to peek over the ridge. Most people around here were still asleep or nursing their first cup of bad coffee. I had already milked 2 cows, fed the horses, and was halfway through inspecting the southern fence line when my ranch hand, Caleb, came tearing across the pasture in the old Kawasaki mule, looking like he'd just seen a ghost. "Clint!" he shouted before even stopping. "We've got cops at the front gate." I stood upright slowly, wiped the sweat and mud from my brow, and narrowed my eyes toward the gravel road that cut through my property like a scar. Sure enough, 2 county sheriff vehicles were parked near the cattle guard. One deputy stood behind the hood of his car like I was a threat, hand resting on his hip. The other was already talking to one of my field hands near the gate. Poor kid looked pale as flour. I walked toward them calmly, wiping my hands on a dirty rag. Caleb followed behind me, muttering something about not wanting to get shot over a damn cow. Can't say I blamed him. "Morning, officers," I said evenly as I approached. Something wrong. The one behind the cruiser, mid-30s, square jaw, new boots, raised an eyebrow. "You Clint Weston?" "I am. What's this about?" We got a 911 call about an armed individual trespassing on HOA-managed land. Caller claimed you were carrying a firearm, threatening residents. Said you were digging trenches near residential property with heavy machinery. Ring any bells? I laughed. I couldn't help it. The only trench I dug this morning was to fix a busted irrigation line. And yes, I carry a rifle. This is bear country, officer. Wouldn't recommend being out here without one. The younger officer stepped forward now, holding a tablet. "You have any documentation on you proving land ownership?" "Sure," I said, reaching slowly into my coat. "Though I'm guessing whoever called you didn't mention this is private property, my family's farm since 1947, and that we're not part of any HOA, past, present, or hell-freezing future." I handed him my laminated deed, neatly folded in a clear sleeve with a highlighted map showing the parcel boundaries. It included the official county GIS coordinates and a scanned copy of the original land grant, signed, stamped, and notarized long before the nearby cookie-cutter development even existed. The officers exchanged a look. The younger one stepped back and tapped at his tablet, probably verifying the county database. "Looks like everything checks out," the older one finally said. "No indication this land is under HOA jurisdiction. You understand why we had to check, though? We respond to all weapons-related calls seriously." "Of course," I nodded. "But maybe next time, y'all verify who owns the land before rolling up like I'm holding hostages." The younger deputy offered a faint smile. "We'll update the report and note the boundary issue. Sorry for the interruption, sir." They turned and walked back to their cruisers, and just like that, they were gone. I stood at the gate a few seconds longer, staring out toward the ridge where the edge of my land met the HOA development. I knew who was behind the call. I'd seen her peeking over the hill before, that walking Botox manifesto with binoculars and a clipboard. Karen Houseman, queen of the cardboard palaces. She'd waved at me once like she owned the valley. I didn't wave back. The next morning, another call came in. This time, the deputy said someone reported a possible squatter engaging in unauthorized livestock operations. 2 days later, it was construction without a permit, then open flames near a residential zone. Always vague, always anonymous. I started keeping a log. 3 weeks in, I had 6 different calls documented, each time forcing me to walk to the front, explain myself to increasingly embarrassed deputies, and prove for the 100th time that I was farming my own land. With my own tools, under my own sky. Then came the envelope. Official-looking HOA letterhead, hand-delivered to my mailbox even though I wasn't part of their damn community. The letter stated in bureaucratic lingo so thick you could pave a road with it that my farm had been included within the newly restructured Pine Range Valley HOA Cluster 7 boundaries, effective retroactively from a supposed vote I was never informed of. They actually said I owed back dues. for 240 acres of ranch land. I read the letter 3 times, then laughed so hard I nearly fell off the porch, but something in the pit of my gut didn't find it funny. 2 days after the letter landed in my mailbox, I drove down to the Pine Range Valley HOA office in Ennis. I figured if someone was going to fabricate a land grab and slap my name on it, I deserved the courtesy of seeing their smug faces up close. The office was nestled in the faux rustic welcome center of the subdivision, a tan stucco box pretending to be a log cabin, complete with a fake stone chimney and plastic deer antlers nailed to the front door. Inside, the air smelled like printer toner and scented candles. Behind a counter sat a woman in a coral blazer and reading glasses the size of salad plates. She looked up and offered a tight smile, like she was trained to smile but forgot why. "Can I help you?" "You can try. I'm Clint Weston," I said, setting the HOA letter down on the counter like it was evidence in a criminal trial. "Someone decided my ranch is suddenly part of this association, and I'm here to find out which idiot signed off on that fantasy." Her smile stiffened. "Let me get the president." That's when I met her in person, Karen Hausman. She emerged from a side door like a prosecutor entering a courtroom she already owned. Blazer too tight, hair too perfect, and clipboard clutched like a holy relic. She didn't offer a handshake. "Of course not." "Mr. Weston," she said in a syrupy tone that could melt enamel. "I was wondering when you might stop by." "I'm here now. Let's talk about this Cluster 7 nonsense." She led me into a glass-walled conference room decorated with watercolor prints of moose and real estate posters that screamed fake wilderness, real HOA fees. She set her clipboard down like it was a judge's gavel. "As you've seen," she began, "Pine Range Valley HOA recently passed an internal motion to expand oversight into adjacent parcels per our Community Integration Initiative. Your land is adjacent, undeveloped beyond acceptable parameters, and part of what we consider the Extended Eco-Buffer Zone." I stared at her. "Extended what now?" She slid a large, glossy map across the table. It was a full-color print, marked with neat little plots in pastel tones. In the center, my 240 acres were highlighted in pink, labeled Farming Zone Community Oversight Required. I looked closer. The map had no surveyor's signature, no engineering stamp, but it did have an HOA logo and a watermark that read, "Approved March 2023, Planning Review Committee." "Karen," I said carefully, "this map isn't official, there's no seal, no county reference, no legal weight." She smiled like I'd just misunderstood a recipe. "It's pre-certified. We've submitted the amendment to the Madison County Planning Office. It's a formality." I picked up the map and held it toward the window light. "This is a brochure, not a legal document." "I would be cautious with your tone," she said, cool as marble. "Per the updated HOA charter, failure to comply with integration standards may result in lien placement and property reassignment review." I laughed out loud. "Oh, honey," I said, "you have no idea who you're dealing with." She stiffened. "Excuse me. I was a state prosecutor for 22 years. You just threatened me with something that doesn't exist. You're using a fake map referencing non-existent authority, and you're one phone call away from being subpoenaed for fraud." Her nostrils flared. "You're not welcome here if you refuse to be civil." I leaned in just enough. "I didn't come for civility. I came for answers. And what I just got was a confession in slow motion." She reached for the map, but I folded it, stuck it under my arm, and stood up. As I walked out, she hissed, "You can't destroy community harmony just because you want to play cowboy." I didn't even look back. "I'm not playing, Karen. I am the cowboy." The next morning, someone installed a temporary steel gate across the gravel road that leads to my property, right near the HOA boundary. It had a fresh sign bolted to it. "Private HOA road. Member access only." I called the county road supervisor. He confirmed the road was public all the way to the cattle guard on my line. That afternoon, I fired up the tractor, chained the gate to the front loader, and ripped the whole damn thing out like a loose tooth. An hour later, I was in handcuffs. 2 men in uniforms, badges that looked shiny and new, arrived claiming to be district enforcement officers, acting under a temporary road closure order. They read some nonsense off a clipboard, told me I was interfering with county infrastructure, and detained me pending identification. Thing was, they didn't radio it in. They didn't call a transport. They just sat there with me cuffed on my own tailgate until a real deputy from the sheriff's office showed up. That deputy took one look at the uniforms and asked, "You boys with the county?" They didn't answer. "Let me see your credentials," he said. They didn't have any. 5 minutes later, they were the ones in cuffs, and I was free, standing next to my tractor with the gate still in the bucket. Turns out the officers were part of a private security cooperative, registered as a Rural Safety Patrol, with an address that traced back to the Pine Range Valley HOA office. I didn't go inside that evening. I went straight to my barn, pulled out my files, and made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, a friend from the Attorney General's office. I had a feeling I'd need every ounce of leverage I could muster. By sunrise the next day, news had already begun to ripple through the valley. Caleb came stomping into the barn with a half-drunk thermos of coffee and his phone in hand. "You seen this?" he asked, holding it out. Local feed. Headline read, "Local rancher arrested over HOA dispute, misunderstanding, or land war brewing." Below it, a blurry photo of me standing next to my tractor, arms spread like I was mid-sermon, steel gate still dangling from the front loader behind me. Karen was going to love that one. I shrugged it off and told Caleb to saddle up. We had fencing to check and livestock to move. Whatever was brewing with the HOA, I wasn't about to let it interfere with the actual damn work. But the quiet didn't last. Just after noon, while I was back behind the west paddock fixing a downed wire, I got a call from my wife, Mags. Her voice was tight. "Clint, there are 2 officers here again. They're asking about a zoning compliance review. One of them is recording with his phone. They say they need access to inspect the barn." "Put me on speaker." I introduced myself, asked them who they were with. One replied, "District Civil Enforcement." I asked for badge numbers. They gave me 4-digit alphanumerics that didn't match any county format I'd ever seen. I told them to wait right where they were and that I'd be back in 15. I rolled up in the mule in under 10. The 2 officers stood near my front porch, both in tactical khaki uniforms without official insignia and cheap nylon belts with pepper spray and batons, but no sidearms. The one doing the talking was a big guy, maybe 40, with a jaw like a brick and mirrored sunglasses. The other looked young enough to still be getting junk mail from his college fraternity. I stepped out and crossed my arms. "Last time you boys dropped by, you left in handcuffs, so let's not do the rodeo again. Who sent you?" "We're following up on a community complaint regarding unauthorized structures and illegal livestock volumes within HOA boundaries," the older one said. "This is a private farm," I said flatly. "It's never been under HOA jurisdiction, and it never will be." "The boundaries were recently updated," he replied. "You're in active review status." "I'm in active don't give a damn status," I said, stepping closer. "Now show me credentials." "Real ones, or you're trespassing." The kid shifted nervously, looking toward the mule like he was half expecting me to grab something from the back. They didn't show ID. Instead, the older guy pulled out a document from a leather folder and tried to hand it to me. I didn't touch it. "Let me guess," I said. "Another printed PDF with a fake header and an HOA seal at the bottom. You do know impersonating law enforcement is a felony in Montana, right?" Still no answer. That's when I spotted it. His name stitched on his shirt, K. Dryden. I remembered that name. Dryden used to work security at a courthouse in Bozeman. Got let go for exceeding the scope of authority. That was code for putting hands on someone he wasn't supposed to. I pulled my phone and dialed Sheriff McAllister. We'd worked together on a racketeering case almost 15 years ago. I gave him the rundown. While I was still talking to him, I saw the older guy mutter something to his partner. The kid bolted. I stepped in front of him. "Don't," I warned. "You want this to go on your record, too." A few minutes later, 2 real sheriff deputies rolled in with lights flashing. Dryden tried to bluff his way through it, but McAllister wasn't in the mood. They searched his vehicle and found a fake civil enforcement ID card, a binder full of HOA violation notices with pre-filled names, and an HOA purchase tablet logged into a local utility database. The charges were immediate: criminal impersonation, unlawful detainment attempt, and trespassing. The kid got it lighter, but he was still cuffed. I watched them drive off in the back of the cruiser. Then I turned to Mags, who stood on the porch with arms folded. She looked tired. "We're not dealing with soccer moms anymore," she said. "They're playing hardball." "They started it," I muttered, "but they're not going to like how I finish it." That evening, I called Marshall again, my old colleague at the AG's office. I told him I was compiling everything: letters, fake maps, footage from the tractor incident, now this impersonation attempt, and wanted to know the best route for a federal injunction or an emergency hearing. He paused for a long time, then asked me to scan and send everything I had. "You're dealing with more than a rogue HOA," he said. "Sounds like someone's running a parallel enforcement scheme. And that's not just illegal, that's organized criminal activity. If any of this is tied to public records tampering, we might be looking at something way bigger." "Good," I said, "because I'm not interested in stopping this at a fence line. I want the whole damn thing dismantled." He told me to sit tight and expect a call back within 72 hours. So I did what any rancher would do when war is brewing. I put fresh rounds in the 12 gauge, had Caleb rotate night shifts at the barn, and installed 4 new floodlights with motion sensors at every gate. They wanted to escalate? Fine. I was ready for the next move. The callback from Marshall came faster than expected. Less than 24 hours after I sent him everything I had, my phone buzzed while I was up on the North Ridge overseeing some corral repairs. I climbed down from the scaffold and answered on speaker, crouching beside the barn wall for shelter from the wind. "Clint," he said without preamble, "you were right. Something stinks." That was all I needed to hear. He explained he'd done a preliminary sweep through the public property filings and matched the coordinates listed in the HOA's Cluster 7 map with county zoning records. And here's the kicker. My land hadn't been altered in the official county system. The real record still showed the original 1947 ownership line, still registered solely under my name, fully independent from any HOA overlay. But, and this was the part that made my blood run cold, the online GIS system used by contractors, utility workers, and realtors had been quietly edited. Who has the access to do that? I asked. County GIS techs, or someone with admin credentials, which, by the way, are monitored and logged. I pulled the system logs. He paused. There were edits made in late April by a user login registered to E. Houseman. "Let me guess," I said. "That's not a coincidence." "Nope. That's Ethan Houseman, Karen's son. According to the records, he's a GIS assistant contracted to Madison County through a third-party vendor. He used his temp credentials to upload an overlay, showing your property as Provisional Zone HOA 7. Just enough to confuse databases and fool junior staff into thinking you were under review." I clenched my jaw. "So, they poisoned the map from the inside." "Exactly, but it gets better. Karen submitted a form to the planning office 2 weeks later, marked as Supplemental Jurisdiction Expansion. It included a printout of that same map, now marked Approved." "Approved by who?" "Fake stamp. There's no signature, just a scanned seal from an engineer who retired 2 years ago." I stood slowly, scanning the ridge. Something about all this hit deeper than a simple power trip. This wasn't just HOA nonsense. This was a coordinated attempt to seize land by faking official documents. And if it had worked on me, they could have tried it again on someone who couldn't fight back. "What's our move?" I asked. "You're filing a cease and desist immediately," Marshall said. "But I'd also recommend prepping a motion for injunctive relief. And Clint, I think this might qualify as attempted constructive eviction via fraud, which is felony level. He offered to loop in someone from the regional fraud unit to assist if I wanted to go full steam. I told him yes. All gas, no brakes. After we hung up, I drove into town with every paper I had, deeds, tax maps, receipts, even an old black and white aerial photo of the ranch from the 1960s. I had it all scanned and notarized, then stopped by the county assessor's office to request a full copy of any and all recent boundary updates related to HOA Cluster 7. The clerk, a young guy who couldn't have been more than 23, nervously tapped through his terminal, then looked up at me. "Sir, your property was listed as under review for HOA alignment as of last month. But there's no physical signature from a property owner, which is normally required, and there's a footnote that says expedited processing approved by director review." "Who's the director?" He frowned. "That's the weird part. The listed director on this case file is Karen Houseman." I laughed, but not out of humor. "She doesn't work for the county." "I know. That's why I flagged it weird. I filed a formal complaint on the spot and had the clerk print out a hard copy of the entry. Then, on a hunch, I drove to the office of a local land surveyor I'd worked with a few years back. Tom Rydell, honest man, ex-Army engineer, and no fan of government overreach. I showed him the HOA map. He looked at it for less than 5 seconds and said, "This is garbage. The contour lines are wrong. The buffer zones don't follow the real watershed pattern, and whoever did this mirrored the property lines from a proposal map, not an actual field survey." "You sure?" He snorted. "Positive." This was stitched together from public PDFs. See that index mark? That's only used in draft files from 2018. Could you put that in writing? Already doing it. I left his office with a certified surveyor statement declaring the HOA's map to be fraudulent and non-qualifying for land demarcation under Montana statute. Between that, the GIS logs, and the planning office records, I now had a full chain of evidence. I drove home late, exhausted but focused. As I crested the hill above the ranch house, I saw headlights in the lower field, 3 sets, slowly creeping near the power line junction box. Not again. I turned off my lights, parked the truck behind the tree line, and grabbed my shotgun. If they wanted to keep pretending this land was theirs, they were about to get a rude education in boundary enforcement. I parked the truck silently, nestled under the canopy of pines that lined the east fence. From my vantage point on the rise, I had a clear view of the lower pasture. 3 vehicles, 2 dark pickups, and a white service van. No markings, no lights, just idling slow like they were trying not to be noticed. They'd pulled up near the pump house, the same one we rebuilt last winter after the freeze cracked the main valve. The underground electric junction was there too. Cutting it would kill power to the well, barn lighting, and part of the electric fence line. I moved downhill on foot, shotgun at low ready. No hero complex, just habit. Years in courtrooms make you cautious. Years on a ranch make you quiet. As I crept around the southern gate, a figure came into view, mid-30s, tall, tactical jacket, holding what looked like wire cutters and a small tool pouch. Another was crouched near the breaker box, flashlight between his teeth, fiddling with something. The third guy was still in the van, maybe lookout, maybe driver. I stopped just shy of the old cattle trough and spoke calmly, but loud enough to carry. "Don't move." They froze. I said, "Don't move. Drop the tools and hands where I can see them." Flashlight guy flinched and reached for his belt. Bad idea. I racked the shotgun, took 2 firm steps forward, and leveled it. Try that again, and I'll leave a warning slug in the dirt under your feet, or in it. That settled them down. I kept them covered while I pulled my phone with one hand and dialed McAllister direct. To his credit, the sheriff didn't waste a second. He dispatched 2 deputies and said he'd come himself. 15 minutes later, I heard the crunch of gravel up the road and the familiar chirp of official sirens winding down. When the units arrived, the 3 were zip-tied and separated. The van was popped open, and no surprise, it held a full kit of unauthorized tools, wire cutters, fake utility forms, and a printed work order bearing the seal of Madison HOA Utility Coordination Dept, which, as McAllister said right there, didn't exist. 2 of the guys had previous misdemeanor trespass charges. The third, the flashlight biter, was none other than Ken Dryden again, out on bail from last week's impersonation stunt, violating release conditions, caught on private property with intent to sabotage. McAllister's patience ran out. He arrested all 3 on felony attempted tampering with utility infrastructure, trespassing, and conspiracy to commit fraud. He also confiscated their phones, which, per his later warrant, contained group chats with Karen Hausman discussing neutralizing Weston's edge before legal escalation. So much for plausible deniability. I gave my full statement under oath that night, then helped his guys photograph the scene and lock down the box. Caleb helped patch the cut cable temporarily with a generator backup, and by dawn, we had lights again. But it wasn't about electricity anymore. It was about control. I called Marshall the next morning and laid it all out. He said, "Clint, you're not just reacting anymore. You've got cause for a full civil action, plus the criminal complaints. This is shaping up like a racketeering case." "Rico?" I asked. "If we can tie the HOA board, their funds, and these coordinated acts together, yes. It's not just petty harassment. It's organized coercion for material gain." I sat with that for a minute, then I asked him how soon we could file. "Soon," he said. "But I want more. We need the HOA's internal finances, meeting minutes, communications, anything showing premeditated action." I told him I had an idea. Karen thought she owned the map, the borders, the rules. But she hadn't considered one thing. The HOA bylaws were recorded in the same public records she tried to rewrite, and by her own filing, any member could request access to board minutes and budgets. Time to exploit the enemy's rulebook. 2 days later, I walked into the Pine Range Valley HOA administrative office dressed like any other irritated landowner. Pressed shirt, clean jeans, folder under my arm, and my hat tilted just right. The front desk receptionist glanced up, cheerful and clueless. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" I gave her a tight smile. "Yes, ma'am. Clint Weston." According to your own articles of incorporation, any party affected by the HOA's geographic jurisdiction is entitled to review recent board meeting minutes and budgets upon written request. Here's mine. She blinked at the paper I slid across the desk, then forced another smile. "Let me check with the board clerk. Please have a seat." I sat. I waited. 12 minutes later, a man in a cheap blazer appeared. Mid-50s, lawyer vibes, hair combed flat with the kind of precision that screams, "I bill by the hour." "I'm James Lathrop," he said, sitting across from me with a clipboard and a forced chuckle. "You're the gentleman from the old Weston tract. There's some confusion, of course. Your property isn't formally enrolled, but it's adjacent and possibly impacted. The board is just trying to ensure consistency." "Sure," I replied flatly. "And under that very concern, I'm entitled to inspect your books." His smile didn't fade, but his eyes tightened. Normally, this sort of transparency is extended to enrolled members, but I suppose we can make a discretionary exception. "Not discretionary, mandatory," I corrected. He didn't argue. 15 minutes later, I was seated at a faux oak conference table with 2 boxes of files, one dated Operations 2022-2024 and the other labeled Security Contracts. I pulled out my phone and began scanning everything. And then I struck gold. The HOA had made over $100,000 in unitemized security payments to an entity called Western Environs Enforcement Group, LLC. I ran that name through my own database, a shell company incorporated 8 months ago, address matching. The HOA office, registered agent Karen Hausman. That alone wasn't just shady, it was criminally stupid. But it got better. Inside the meeting minutes, I found an expansion plan brief prepared by Karen and co-signed by 2 other board members. It stated, "Cluster 7 will allow us to absorb the western parcels adjacent to National Forest land and enforce compliance under existing covenants, even if parcel owners are currently unregistered. Legal challenge is unlikely if initiative proceeds quickly with enforcement optics." Enforcement optics. That's what they called the fake cops. The trespasses, the sabotage. I photographed every page, every dollar, every signature. By the time I walked out, I had 3 hours of evidence and enough documentation to bring down a Fortune 500 board, let alone a suburban HOA run by power-hungry idiots. Marshall nearly dropped the phone when I told him what I'd found. "That's it," he said. "We're going to court, and we're not just asking for an injunction anymore. We're going for total dissolution." That night, I installed new trail cams, motion lights, and infrared perimeter sensors across the southern and eastern boundaries. If anyone stepped foot near my water tank again, I'd know before they left the road. But the bigger battle was shifting into the legal arena now. My goal wasn't just to defend the farm. I wanted their whole operation exposed, bankrupted, and crushed in public. I stood outside the Madison County Courthouse that morning, just before 9, coffee in one hand, thick binder in the other. The air had that crisp bite of late spring in Montana, sunlight sharp, snow still hanging on distant peaks. Marshall met me at the steps, his suit sharp, eyes sharper. "You ready to make this loud?" he asked. Born ready. We filed the civil suit at 9:13 a.m. sharp. It was a tactical nuke wrapped in 128 pages. Weston v. Pine Range Valley HOA et al. The core accusations were severe. Fraudulent property claims, attempted coercion, criminal impersonation, illicit payments to unlicensed enforcement agents, and, the nuclear one, civil RICO violations. Marshall wasn't bluffing. He had banking records, internal HOA memos, and evidence of coordination between Karen and her fake security goons. The icing was the meeting minutes with their talk of enforcement optics and absorbing unregistered parcels. It sounded like something from a cartel strategy memo. By noon, the clerk stamped the complaint and sealed the court date. Preliminary injunction hearing in 2 weeks. Marshall also filed for a restraining order barring the HOA from sending anyone near my land in the meantime. Karen found out faster than I expected. That afternoon, as I was feeding the cattle near the west pasture, a bright red BMW came tearing down the gravel road like it was running from a fire. It skidded to a stop just outside my gate. Karen stepped out, heels sinking into the dirt, her usual smugness replaced by a red-faced fury. "You absolute snake," she hissed through the fence. "You don't even live in our district." "You're right," I said, tipping my hat. "I don't. And That's exactly the problem, isn't it? You're trying to destroy years of community building. No, I cut in. I'm trying to destroy your little racketeering syndicate, Karen. And it's working. She tried to shove open the gate, but it didn't budge. Reinforced steel, magnetic lock. I had installed it after the sabotage incident. You're making a mistake, she said, practically trembling. The HOA board is protected by charter law. Tell it to the judge, I said. Then I walked away and let her scream at the cows. That night, local news picked up the story. The headline wasn't subtle. Former state prosecutor sues HOA for land grab scheme. Criminal charges possible. My name was all over the piece. The report quoted heavily from Marshall's filing and even pulled up maps showing how the HOA had tried to redraw boundaries without legal authorization. By the next morning, I had 7 voicemails from neighbors I barely knew, all thanking me. 3 said they'd been harassed too. One, an elderly couple on a 5-acre parcel west of mine, told me someone from HOA advised them to remove their satellite dish or face fines, even though they were outside HOA territory just like me. I added that to our file. The dominoes were starting to fall, but I knew Karen wouldn't give up that easy. And, sure enough, that weekend, she made her next move. Late Saturday night, just after 11, a drone buzzed above our barn. Not one of mine. I grabbed a flashlight and my rifle, tracked it visually, and saw it hovering over the roof, then swooping low across the field, right over my cattle. I brought it down with a clean shot. Sunday morning, I found the wreckage, commercial-grade drone, thermal camera rig, and a micro SD card with several infrared surveillance clips of our ranch, clearly labeled by date and GPS. Karen had taken the fight into surveillance territory now. Perfect. I called Marshall. You think a restraining order violation with a drone counts? Against livestock and a minor structure, absolutely, he said. Let's add aggravated trespass by electronic means and violation of injunctive relief to the stack. And we did. The judge would see all of it. The preliminary injunction hearing drew more attention than I expected. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, neighbors, even a few quiet board members from HOA pretending they had no idea what was happening. Karen arrived flanked by 2 attorneys I didn't recognize, dressed in a power suit like she was walking into a country club meeting, not a legal bloodbath. Marshall leaned over to me as we sat down at the plaintiff's table. We've got the judge we wanted. Used to be a federal property litigator. She's not going to fall for HOA fluff. The hearing kicked off with formalities, but things got electric the moment Marshall submitted the drone footage and digital metadata. The judge paused, asked Karen's attorneys if they disputed the authenticity. They didn't. They tried to pivot. My client merely acted out of concern for community safety. Your client surveilled private property under active injunctive motion, the judge snapped. Do not insult this court with euphemisms. From there, it snowballed. Marshall rolled out each exhibit like a seasoned showman. The forged security payments to Western Environs Enforcement. The fake boundary map with Karen's HOA stamp. The LLC registry tying the fake cops to Karen's home address. The meeting minutes with phrases like absorbing unregistered parcels and enforcement optics. Every time a new document hit the screen, I saw another juror wince. And when Marshall presented the memo signed by Karen proposing a strategic enforcement presence to discourage resistance, the courtroom gasped. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lit cigarette. The judge didn't waste time. She granted a full restraining order against the HOA entering or contacting me, my family, or my property in any capacity, but it didn't end there. She referred the evidence for criminal investigation, citing possible conspiracy to commit fraud, unauthorized law enforcement impersonation, and civil racketeering. Karen's face didn't twitch, but one of her lawyers started whispering very quickly. After the session, we stepped out into a wall of microphones. Marshall gave the statement. Today was just the beginning. This case reveals a dangerous abuse of homeowner association powers that must be stopped statewide. My phone blew up. Local stations, regional stations, even a podcast host I'd never heard of wanted a soundbite. That night, the HOA tried to downplay everything on their website, calling it a misunderstanding about jurisdictional overlap. The next morning, that page was gone. So was Karen's listing on the board directory, but she wasn't done fighting yet. I woke up Tuesday to find an official-looking envelope duct taped to my front gate. No stamp, no return address, just bold text. Notice of termination. Unregistered occupation of Cluster 7. Final warning. Inside was a typed letter claiming I had 72 hours to vacate shared community property. I laughed. Then I called Marshall and handed the whole thing to the sheriff's department. That same afternoon, the sheriff's deputy personally escorted me to HOA headquarters so I could serve them with a cease and desist and a formal notice of contempt. I wasn't there for revenge. I was there to deliver the final shot before the hammer came down. Karen tried to avoid us, but she was in the main office. She locked herself in a conference room until the deputy knocked hard and told her she was now under investigation. I saw her face through the glass. No words, no screaming. Just a pale look of someone who realized the ground had just crumbled beneath her heels. By the end of the week, the Montana State Attorney General's office formally opened an investigation into Pine Range Valley HOA. A task force was created. The sheriff's office served a search warrant on the HOA office early Thursday morning, and I drove by just in time to see boxes being carried out. Uniformed investigators came and went. They weren't just looking for Karen's mistakes. They were digging up the whole operation. Marshall called later that day. We've got email chains between Karen and two former deputy prosecutors discussing seizure procedures. They even joked about using old statutes nobody reads to scare landowners into compliance. Idiots, I muttered, gripping the phone tighter. They left fingerprints on everything. Not just fingerprints. One of them left invoice records from a shared Dropbox. Real genius. As the search expanded, we learned the HOA had tried similar pressure tactics on at least 4 other non-member properties, 2 of which had elderly owners who'd caved and signed temporary community access agreements. We reached out to those families and offered them our legal team pro bono. Then came the kicker. A former board treasurer flipped. She turned in dozens of internal records, meeting logs, reimbursement slips, even a voice memo from Karen talking about eliminating private holdouts. Apparently, Karen was obsessed with making the HOA appear seamlessly mapped from satellite view. I swear she had the logic of a Bond villain. That same day, federal investigators executed a warrant on the private security firm Karen had used to impersonate law enforcement. They seized weapons, body armor, fake IDs, and radio equipment, all tied to HOA payroll. One of the guards cracked and admitted that Karen personally gave the orders to assert control over my land. The story exploded statewide. I was invited to speak on a regional news segment about HOA abuse and rural landowner rights. I kept it simple. My land was never theirs, and they knew it. They thought no one would fight back. I ended the interview with a warning. If someone shows up on your land saying you owe them loyalty, fines, or silence, ask for their map. Then show them yours. The day after, Karen was officially charged with conspiracy, impersonation, fraud, and attempted unlawful seizure. She was arrested in her home, not by fake security, but by real marshals. The press got a shot of her being led out in cuffs. The following week, 3 former county employees were indicted on lesser charges for abuse of power and falsification of records. 2 took plea deals. 1 fought it and lost. The court froze HOA's bank accounts. Their website went offline. Board members started resigning en masse. The association officially ceased operations pending court dissolution. And just like that, the giant fell. But for me, it wasn't over. I had one more thing to do. Stand before that judge and lay it all out, one final time. The courtroom was quieter than usual for the final hearing. No cameras, no crowd. Just the judge, a few attorneys, and the weight of months of escalating madness resting in the air like dust in sunlight. Karen sat across from me, no longer posturing, no tailored suit this time, just a beige sweater and the look of someone who'd finally run out of corridors to hide in. The prosecution laid out the full scope: conspiracy to defraud, impersonation of law enforcement, attempted unlawful seizure of property, falsification of official records, and criminal harassment. When they played that voice memo of Karen bragging about breaking the resistance with legal noise and tactical presence, the judge raised her eyebrows so hard I thought they might leave her forehead. Karen's attorney tried to argue for leniency, claimed she was overzealous, not malicious. The judge cut him off. She created a parallel authority, endangered private citizens, and knowingly weaponized government structure to pursue land theft. This wasn't negligence. It was ambition without law. Then came the sentence: 15 years in prison with no chance of parole for the first 10. She didn't flinch, but I saw her hands tremble when the judge denied bail pending appeal. Her 2 fake officers, 8 years each, with forfeiture of all tactical equipment. The former assistant DAs who helped her manipulate records got 3 years of probation and lost their licenses. And me? I was awarded $1.2 million in damages. Half of it was for economic losses, crop delays, equipment damaged by the power outages, and legal fees. The rest was for emotional distress and punitive damages. Karen was also ordered to issue a formal written apology, to be publicly archived in the county recorder's office. I didn't care about the money. Hell, I didn't even want the apology. I wanted the gate back. That afternoon, I rebuilt it myself. Just me, my tools, and a fresh slab of walnut. Took me 5 hours, but when I hung that final piece, I stepped back and admired the sign I'd burned into the wood by hand. This farm is not HOA property. You have been warned once. 2 weeks later, a neighbor from 4 miles up the road dropped by with coffee and a handshake. Said his cousin had just been hit with a similar HOA stunt, and he didn't know where to turn. I gave him Marshall's number, then paused. "You know what?" I said. "I've got extra time. I'll help him myself." That's how it started. Calls from ranchers, old folks, landowners who didn't speak legalese but knew when they were being pushed around. I set up a nonprofit, pro bono only. One goal, to stop these associations from steamrolling over people who just want to live in peace on land they paid for. We called it Ground Back, because that's what we were taking.